Now that we understand a bit about the process of formation of gametes, we have to take the next logical step, which is to talk about an Austrian monk who's been dead for 140 years. We're going to be talking about Gregor Mendel, who worked with pea plants, as pictured here, and discovered a ton of stuff that is sort of foundational to the way that we understand genetics today. Gregor Mendel was this Austrian monk. He was alive at the same time as Charles Darwin, although it appears that Darwin was unaware of his work. He was largely unknown in his day, and his work was rediscovered after his death in the 20th century. And like I said, it really helps us to understand the process of handing down gametes to the next generation. So he looked at pea plants, and he would do these things where he would cross what's called true breeding pea plants. He would take pea plants that had violet flowers. They always had violet flowers going back for generation after generation. And he would cross them with plants that had white flowers. White flowers back for generation after generation. These are what are called true breeding plants. And he would cross them, and he discovered that they always had purple flowers. So if you take a true breeding violet plant and a true breeding white plant, you cross them together, their offspring always have violet flowers. Always. But then he would take that what's called F1 generation, and he would make them fertilize. He would fertilize them to themselves, and then what he saw was that some of those plants, most of those plants actually were violet. Most of the plants were violet, but some of them were white. And they always occurred in very, very similar numbers. Whenever he did this, he saw the same sort of patterns taking place, sort of 1 to 3 pattern. Before we continue on with Mendel and his work, we need to clarify a few different things. We need to talk about the difference between a trait, a gene, and an allele. So what you see up here are pictures of different traits. And whenever we see a trait, we're going to refer to that as a phenotype. A phenotype is something that you can observe just by looking at an organism. So, by the way, a different phenotype could just mean a different version of a different protein, but you can observe it, maybe not just by looking at it, but you can observe, oh, it has a slightly different version of that protein. So we have here all of these different traits, all of these different phenotypes that pea plants can have. Okay, so each of these phenotypes is the result of these plants' genes. Okay, so there is a gene in these pea plants for either round or wrinkled. There's a gene for color of the seed. There's a gene for the color of the flower. There's the gene for the shape of the pod. There's a gene for the position of the flower, etc. Okay. Phenotypes are observable characteristics. Genes are regions of the DNA that code for protein. So because these plants have different genes, they have different proteins coding for them, that's going to cause them to be these different colors. Okay. The next idea here is the idea of an allele. So an allele is a different form of a gene. So I saw a really great example online actually, and he said if Coca-Cola was the gene, the alleles for Coca-Cola would be classic, diet, Coke Zero, whatever other versions of Coke there are out there are the alleles. So in this case, the allele is for seed, or the gene is for seed shape, and the alleles are round and wrinkled. Or the gene is for seed color, and the alleles are yellow or green. So an allele is a version of a gene. An allele is a version of a gene. Okay, And you get your alleles from your parents. They come on your chromosomes. So remember, I have 2 copies of every chromosome, right? We have 23 pairs of chromosomes, meaning we have 46 total. And I have that maternal chromosome and that paternal chromosome. And maybe I have different alleles on each of those. I alluded to this in a previous lecture, but maybe I have different versions, different alleles. Here's my mom's gene for being tall. Here's my dad's gene. Here's my mom's allele for being tall. Here's my dad's allele for being short. So in the next video, we're going to talk about what dominant versus incomplete dominant versus codominance is in genetics, and why that was that Gregor Mendel got so lucky with the particular genes that he picked to study.